A desperate and wild struggle. That's how law enforcement officials describe what they've heard on the cockpit voice recorder of United Flight 93. In the days since that plane went down outside Pittsburgh, we've brought you the stories of the phone calls made by some of the passengers who were most likely in that confrontation with the hijackers. Tonight, another member of that courageous group, a beloved husband and father, an adored son, an able business leader, and a man who would not sit quietly and let the terrorists carry out their plan.
Tommy was a courageous lad.
He was a leader. I cannot speak highly enough of him.
Tom Burnett Jr. grew up in a land where larger-than-life legends were what a small boy had to look up to. A Minnesota kid, a hometown boy whose airplane rides were pretty timid back then. An outdoorsy type who loved to fish with his dad, to swim with his mom. A pesky little brother who earned the total devotion of his two sisters. Like many young American males, he loved sports. Baseball was an early passion. And by high school, he was the star quarterback on the football team. A big guy, 6'2", 205 pounds. But while his close-knit family happily stayed put in a Minneapolis suburb, Tom Burnett acquired a taste for adventure. He won an appointment to the Air Force Academy, where he would have learned to fly, but left when he discovered he'd rather give orders than take them. He chose another university and studied business instead, eventually leading a California company that makes a medical device doctors use to mend broken hearts. But business put him in the air. He flew across the country so many times, the woman he proposed to was a flight attendant. When their daughters arrived, first 5-year-old twins Haley and Madison, then a year later Anna Claire, Deena Burnett stopped flying. So when the horrific events of September 11th began to unfold, Deena was in the kitchen fixing breakfast, watching television. She worried because she knew her husband was planning to fly home from New York that morning. She got a call from Tom's mother in Minnesota.
We both knew he was in New York, did not know which flight he was coming out on. And while I was on the phone with her, the phone rang in on call waiting, and I clicked over and it was Tom. And I asked him immediately if he was okay, and he said no. He said, I'm on the airplane, United Flight 93, and it's been hijacked.
What went through your mind? What did you feel?
What went through my mind was just terror. And he gave me a few details and said, please call the authorities, and he hung up.
What details did he give you?
Just that they had knifed a guy, that they had a bomb on board.
Deena immediately called 911, but with all the chaos in New York, it took a while before she could get anyone to believe that her husband was on yet another hijacked plane. While she was talking to the FBI, Tom called again with an update on the hijackers.
And what did he say to you this time?
He said they were in the cockpit. He asked me about the World Trade Center. He asked if it was a passenger airline, and I told him I didn't know. And he said, okay. And he hung up again, said that he had to go.
And then what did you do?
I remember hugging the telephone, waiting for it to ring, and the reporter on TV said that there was a plane that had just hit the Pentagon. And I remember just wailing, thinking that it was my husband's flight because they didn't give the flight number.
Right.
Deena says she began to sob. Her daughters hugged her, asked what was wrong.
And the phone rang, and it was Tom, and I was so glad to hear from him.
So relieved.
I was so relieved.
Deena told him a plane had just crashed into the Pentagon and that she had told the authorities, the FBI, about his calls.
He said, we can't wait for the authorities. We have to do something. And he was just pumping me for information. His adrenaline was flowing, and he was trying to sort it out. And I think he realized much sooner than I did that it was a suicide mission.
And then he hung up.
He hung up. He said, I've got to go. And he hung up.
And 15 seconds later, what would be his final call.
And he said, okay, there's a group of us and we're going to do something. I said, no. I said, please sit down and be still and be quiet. Don't draw attention to yourself. And he said, no. He said, if they're going to drive this plane into the ground, he said, we've got to do something. And he hung up the phone, and he never called back.
How long Deena sat watching, waiting, hoping is a blur. As she stared at the frantic rescue efforts in New York, she says she stubbornly held out for that familiar voice, telling her he had gotten control of the plane. This, even as the pictures of the smoldering wreckage of United Flight 93, Tom's flight, were broadcast.
And I was still holding to the telephone. I held onto the telephone for 3 hours until the battery ran down.
Back in Minnesota, Tom's mother, Beverly, was in a daze, clinging to the futile belief that he would somehow be okay.
I just thought he was coming home.
And no wonder it seemed impossible that he was dead. Only hours before, her beloved and loving son had called her from his hotel room in New York, describing the neon wonderland of Times Square at his feet.
Did you think, oh, I'm sure he survived the crash. I'm sure there must be a mistake.
I thought he was going to be okay. He's just always been there. I just was optimistic that he'd be okay.
His dad, Tom Sr., by all accounts his best friend, fishing buddy, confidant, best man at his wedding, was more realistic.
I was worried, like someone hit me in the stomach, you know.
And when your wife kept saying, it's going to be okay, I'm sure it's okay, what did you say to her?
I just walked out the front door and paced the sidewalk for a bit.
Tom's little sister, Mary Margaret, who always thought her brother walked on water, hadn't seen the pictures yet. She prayed now for a miracle.
So there was hope, and at least I had hope at that point. I thought maybe they crashed safely. Maybe it was one of those, landings. Maybe they hit water.
In fact, his whole family clung to the notion that Tom was somehow invincible.
He could do anything. Not Superman, maybe, but analytical and highly intelligent and capable of doing something like that.
In many of these calls we've heard, people have called really home to say goodbye, and one gets the sense that he didn't really feel like he was calling to say goodbye.
No, he was not calling to say goodbye. And I think that if he had said goodbye, I would have been terrified. He was taking down information, he was planning what they were going to do, and he was not interested in reviewing his life or whispering sweet nothings into the telephone. I assure you, he was problem solving, and he was going to take care of it and come on home.
But in the days since the crash, Tom Burnett's life and death have been reviewed at memorial services across the country, in San Ramon, California, where he lived, and in his hometown of Bloomington, Minnesota.
So we gather this evening to offer memorial mass and celebrate the life of one of the hero victims of United Flight 93, Thomas E. Burnett, Jr.
And those tributes hailing him as a hero, a label his family says he would have found excessive.
He would often get irritated that the word hero would be used freely and on people who were undeserving. He didn't think that there were many heroes out there. And so he would be embarrassed, and yet he would be very honored.
Yes.
Not much comfort to a grieving widow.
So many people are calling him an American hero. Does that help you?
I would much have preferred him to come home than to be anyone's hero.
Deena, what did you say to your kids? You have 3 beautiful little girls, 5 and under.
And I sat them on the bed, and I told them that Dad was not coming home, and they asked why. And I said, well, the plane that he had been on had bad people on it, and the bad people did something to the airplane to make it crash, and that all the people on the airplane died. And they were hanging on every word, and then when I said died, they just burst into tears. And they said, no.
Death is a hard thought when you're only 5.
And I said, well, where is Dad now? If he's dead, where is he? And I said, well, he's in heaven. And my little one said, why does he want to be with Jesus instead of us? And Madison asked if she could call him on his cell phone. And I told her no, that he didn't have a cell phone in heaven. And Hallie said, well, can the postman take a letter to him? So they understand, I think, that he's not coming home. But they don't understand exactly where he is or why.
The why, of course, has many answers. But another question may be why Tom Burnett, Mark Bingham, Todd Beamer, and Jeremy Glick fought back against the terrorists. In the case of Tom Burnett, those who knew him best say he was a deeply spiritual man who rarely missed daily mass, who counted among his closest friends a Roman Catholic priest, Monsignor Joe Slepica.
What causes a person to be that quick? What causes a person to throw his life on the line? It's got to be the fact that he believes God, he knows God is with him.
Not only love of God and love of family, but love of country too. Maybe the thought that his plane might be crashed into the nation's capital is also what propelled Tom Burnett up the aisle of that doomed jet.
What will you tell your children when they're a little bit older about their father?
I'll tell them that he loved them and that he wanted them even before they were ever born. I'll tell them the kind of life he led with honor and dignity and integrity, and how he believed that being a good citizen was the most important thing that any of us could become.
As word of what Tom Burnett did spread, the expressions of support poured into his family. From the White House to the schoolhouse, thanks and praise and comfort.
Mr. Burnett, I am sorry about what happened to your son. I know your son would make a great angel. Your son did not need to die. I know how much you miss him.
Remember that he did a good thing for America, and he's up in heaven watching over you and the rest of his family.
Wherever we go, people know us now, see, in town, that is. And that's comforting. They say, he did a wonderful thing. And
the pride, the overwhelming support, the kindness of strangers. The Burnett family knows it will help them get through these days of numbing disbelief. But they know that soon the hole his death has left in their lives, the ache, will deepen. His sister Martha.
You think he'll call. He'll ring up. He'll walk through the door.
Oh, hi. Get a picture. Oh, hi. How you doing, Mom?
Oh, I missed you so much.
Yes, I missed you also.
good to see you.
Good to see you.
Welcome home, Tom.
And the son and brother who came home for every holiday, for every family celebration, every chance he got, won't be walking through the door again. But the telling and retelling of what he did that Tuesday morning in September will surely earn him a place on that roster of legendary figures he so admired as a little boy.